of British Army soldiers, we can see them there. They'll be marking the 70th anniversary of the Queen's accession to the throne. 70 years ago, actually, yesterday, the 6th of February in 1952, we can see them getting ready there. When Princess Elizabeth then, of course, became Queen, when her father, King George VI, died. The Queen at the time was just 25, away with her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh at the time. They were in Kenya, and tradition dictates that the new monarch accedes the throne instantly, so they came home swiftly. And today is the start now of an official year of celebrations, 70 years since she's been Queen. Over the next few months, there are going to be many events. You may be hosting street parties, there'll be concerts, there's even going to be a platinum pudding competition to mark this 70 years. And there's really no precedent for this. She's the first British monarch to celebrate a platinum jubilee. So all of the celebrations will be new. We can see there absolutely a radiant picture of the Queen celebrating her platinum jubilee. All of the celebrations we have this year will culminate with a 4-day UK bank holiday. That's going to be from Thursday the 2nd to Sunday the 5th of June. It's important to note, though, that today is more of a sombre reflection, of course, celebrated not just here, but across Commonwealth countries as well. Of course, this is the first time the Queen will be celebrating this anniversary without her late husband. Now, over the weekend, she issued a statement of her own reflections of the last 70 years, and she said, "The last 7 decades, we've seen extraordinary progress socially, technologically and culturally that have benefited us all. I'm confident," she says, "that the future will offer similar opportunities to us, and especially to the younger generations in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth," where we can go and see the 41-gun salute now. So that's never happened before. A 41-gun salute to mark 70 years of a British monarch reigning. The start of the platinum celebrations this year. We've just been watching the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery live there in Green Park, just in the shadow of Buckingham Palace. Now, there's going to be another gun salute happening at 1 o'clock, so in just under an hour's time, by the Honourable Artillery Company at the Tower of London. That'll be a 61-gun salute. You can watch that live on our GB News Facebook page at 1 o'clock. I, of course, will be keeping you up to date here on GB News throughout the rest of the day. For now, though, at 7 minutes past 12, let's head back to our normal programming, and it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
Very good afternoon. Welcome to The Briefing PM with me, Darren McCaffrey. It is 8 minutes past 12, standing in for Gloria De Piero this afternoon. Lots coming up on today's programme. I'll be talking with Robert Halfon, the chair of the Education Select Committee, about the formal exams which students will sit this year. We'll also be talking about grade inflation and mental health. I'll have the latest on the PM's position as he appoints a new team at number 10. But will it be enough to stop the letters of no confidence hitting the magic number of 54? And it's fantastic to own a home, of course, but if it's a leasehold, that can bring all sorts of problems. We'll be talking with someone who's won her leasehold battle, along with the local MP, Justin Matters. Really important subject, that. And as always, we'll be talking about the cost of living crisis, particularly when it comes to disability benefits and the issue of sexual violence. So it's in a collective programme. Do get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. A very good afternoon and welcome to the programme. Yeah, very good afternoon. Thank you for your company on this Monday. We're on TV, on radio and online. An eclectic mix, as I say, coming up on today's programme. But we're going to first start off with education, because the pandemic has taken a toll on our children, of course, with 2 years of their education disrupted and damage to many young people's mental health. Well, today, there's a little bit of good news for them. That is that formal exams are going to go ahead again, and that students will be given some advance notice of topics. Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Robert Halfon. He's the chair of the Education Select Committee in Parliament, also the Conservative MP for Harlow. Robert, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, welcome news, of course, that exams are going to go ahead. What do you think about this idea that actually pupils will be given advance notice of some of the topics and also will be graded more generously than in previous years?
I do welcome that exams are taking place. I support the general thrust of the government's proposals, because we know that there have been many thousands of children who've missed school over the past 2 years. There are a couple of elephants in the room, which I think are quite important to consider. The one problem with the government's proposals is, in essence, what they're saying is that everyone can start the race, and the race is going to be half the size as normal. But that doesn't solve the problem for disadvantaged students who've been learning the least during the pandemic, during the time when schools were shut down. And the answer to that is the catch-up programme. But the problem is the catch-up programme, whilst very welcome, £5 billion, is not reaching the most disadvantaged, and there are huge regional disparities. The second elephant in the room is that there are, according to the Centre for Social Justice, a report that was published last week, 13,000 children in year 11 who have mostly not returned to school. So that's a crucial exam year. They've mostly not returned to school since schools were reopened last March. And that is very worrying. So the government need to do a lot more and appoint, in my view, thousands of attendance advisors working with the schools and families to get these kids back to school and learning again.
Yeah, extraordinary that, actually. I want to pick up on that point, because I've read this before, that tens of thousands, I think, of people across the country have almost disappeared off the register, of the school register. Do we know why that is? Why that's happened?
Well, the Social Justice has estimated that over 100,000, it's growing, children have mostly not returned to school. Mostly means over 50% of the time. It's hard to know all the reasons. It could be they've moved areas and they've dropped off the radar. It could be that they've gone from primary to secondary school. It could be that they're getting home education, but of course we don't have a register yet of home educated children. But it's a very worrying situation, because we have hundreds of schools where whole classes, in essence, are just missing, vanished into thin air. And as I say, 13,000 of those children are in year 11 in a crucial exam year. And I'd like to see the government not just get these kids back to school, but also do an audit of almost every child, working with schools and local authorities to see how much, those in exam years, see how much lost learning there's been and how much catch up is needed, and make sure the catch up programme reaches those children.
Also, we all know that the pandemic's had a massive impact, hasn't it, Robert, on pupils' mental health. There's a report out today by England's Children's Commissioner citing big differences depending on where pupils live. I mean, is the government doing enough to address this? And frankly, if not, what needs to be done?
Well, we already had problems, ever-rising problems with children and mental health, and I welcome what the Children's Commissioner has said today. I opposed almost from day one the schools closing for most pupils, because one of the reasons I was worried about the impact on children's mental health, and it has been nothing short of a disaster. You know, mental health referrals amongst children have gone up by 60%. We know that eating disorders amongst young girls went up by 400% during lockdown. The grim statistics are all to see, and I'd like to see the government accelerate the programme to put mental health counsellors in almost every school in the country. I think social media does, although I'm very, enjoy using it just like everybody else, I think social media does a lot of damage to children. I've suggested in Parliament last week that you would have a 2% tax on social media companies like TikTok, for example, and Instagram, which we know have caused a lot of children to have mental health problems. Those kind of social media organisations, a 2% tax which would raise 100 million to then teach children mental health resilience. And I also think what the government needs to do is look seriously, like they are in Wales, at extending the school day. So that's not to learn algebra till 8 o'clock at night, but do mental resilience activities, sporting, creative activities, that all the statistics show that we help children's mental health as well as increasing their educational attainment.
I mean, not to defend social media companies, but I'm sure they and others would point out that they have at least also helped people stay in touch with one another during times in which they've been apart at school. But I also want to touch on this subject that we saw in the Sunday Times yesterday, Labour asking for an urgent question. This idea that private schools have been massively inflating their grades compared to pre-COVID times, particularly compared to state schools. I mean, this seems like it's a proper big scandal, actually.
Yes, and I said to the Sunday Times yesterday that there should be a inquiry by Ofqual, because what these schools appear to have done, by the way, I'm supportive of private schools. My father came here as an immigrant to this country and worked day and night to send me to a private school. I was very lucky. But what these some of them appear to have done, we've got to look at the evidence, is to bake a ginormous rock cake of grade inflation into the system, manipulate the system, game the system, which means that students got higher grades, which means they took some of the best places for university, which also means that those state school pupils or state schools which didn't game the system in the same way were denied those places. And that is wrong. We should have a level playing field for everyone. Everyone should have a chance to climb the ladder of opportunity. Pupils in private schools already privileged. It's not acceptable if there has been gaming of the exam system. And Ofqual needs to mount a serious inquiry, that's the exams regulator, to find out what on earth has been going on.
Yeah, seems pretty extraordinary stuff. Robert, just before we let you go, touch of politics as well, in some ways, in the purest form of it. Steve Barclay is now coming into number 10. He's got 3 jobs, as well as being Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. He's obviously at the Cabinet Office and an MP. Is he able to do all 3?
Well, I welcome the changes they've announced so far. I know Steve Barclay is very credible. He's very intelligent. He's an organiser. I think he'll be able to do the job. His other responsibilities, as I understand it, are being allocated amongst other Cabinet Office ministers. But I think because he knows all of us, he's an MP himself, I actually think that will benefit the government, because it means that MPs can feed directly through to him. He understands the politics. He understands what it's like to be out on the streets, hearing from residents day in, day out about their concerns. So I think it's a good appointment by the Prime Minister.
OK, Robert Halfon, appreciate your time, as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's the Conservatives' Robert Halfon there, Chair of the Education Select Committee. Well, we've been talking about Boris Johnson, whether he'll remain in post. He has changed his top team over the weekend, or at least some of them. We're expecting further announcements later on this week, including the possibility that the Chief Whip might be moved out of his job. But will it be enough for many of the Conservative MPs who, frankly, may well be on the verge of sending in letters to the 1922 committee? And all this, of course, while those two investigations, one by the Metropolitan Police and Sue Gray's full report, are yet to be published. Well, joining me now to talk about all of that is Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, who is in the studio with us. Very good morning to you, Tom. What's been the reaction to the various appointments over the weekend? Robert Halfon seemed pretty pleased, but there are still questions on there.
There are certainly still questions, although it has to be said that those MPs who are talking publicly about the appointments are positive towards them. They feel like there is a greater emphasis towards the parliamentary party when it comes to these appointments. And one of the big criticisms of the Boris Johnson operation over the last 2 years is that MPs didn't feel like they had enough of a say over what was going on in Downing Street. So certainly MPs in senior roles will feel like there is a much better connection with the party. And also this committee through which MPs will be able to suggest policy to Graham Brady, and that go into number 10 as well, that has been met warmly. However, potentially it's those MPs who aren't saying anything at all about this that we need to be keeping an eye on, because we do know that in the WhatsApp groups across the Whips networks, people are being told to cheer on these decisions. And it's those who don't respond to those messages, those who say nothing as opposed to those who oppose the changes, that we need to keep an eye on.
Silence is sometimes more powerful. In saying that, you know, when we look at this kind of direct line to the Prime Minister that MPs are desperate for, in many ways, it is there to shore up support, clearly. And in a democracy, frankly, from a position outside, it looks like a far more sensible way to run things. But it is a sign of weakness that the Prime Minister, you know, who's got an 80-seat majority, is essentially having to kind of devolve some of his power to those MPs for thoughts and ideas.
And certainly there seems to be a bit of a question mark over the situation of having an Office of Prime Minister. The Minister for whom, would he take questions in Parliament? Or surely the Prime Minister takes questions for the Office of the Prime Minister. It seems like there's sort of doubling up of roles here and a bit of a confused network with the Cabinet Office still existing and Office of the Prime Minister existing as well. It seems like there isn't quite this sort of fully fleshed out form of the structures that are being envisaged. Potentially, this was all rushed out a little bit too quickly, brought about by the resignation last week, of course, of Munira Mirza. Meaning that a lot more people went sooner than perhaps was planned, and potentially this is all being rushed in a little bit of a muddled way.
We could talk about politics all day. We've got lots of things to get through. There are three topics I want to get through. First of all, Geeta Harry is the Prime Minister's new Director of Communications. Has given an interview to Welsh Language Channel in which he's described his new boss, Boris Johnson, as not a complete clown. And apparently on the day he took the job, asked Boris Johnson, "Are you going to survive?" before joining in singing that famous song by Gloria De Piero, with the Prime Minister saying that I will survive. I mean, it's an interesting form of strategy, isn't it? Being very frank and open about your kind of first day on the job.
Well, I mean, we both know Gutto. We know that he's someone who doesn't sort of hide what he thinks. And clearly, he was getting across a message to journalists more than anything else this morning when he was walking into number 10 with bottles of water for the staff. Now, if that isn't an allusion to the fact that people might have been drinking wine and eating cheese a bit too much in that building, I don't know what is. Clearly, there is a bit more of an openness and a willingness to tackle these big questions rather than being closed towards them, and that might well win friends.
Well, he did get into a bit of a spat, didn't he, with Dominic Cummings on Twitter over the weekend. A more aggressive strategy, some might say, and that was reflected in Carrie Johnson, I should say, coming out yesterday, taking a very aggressive defence about her lack of role, if you like, within governments.
That's right, and it's very rare for the Prime Minister's wife to put out an official statement. Normally this is done with friends of Carrie or similar things when things are briefed out to the press. So it's an extraordinary intervention, but I suppose an extraordinary intervention that comes off the back of an extraordinary set of stories. It's a book that's being serialised in the Mail by Lord Ashcroft that makes some pretty big accusations about what Carrie Johnson has been doing and how much power she has in Number 10. I have to say, though, that the response to these allegations in the book has been that Carrie Johnson has not had any involvement at all in the way that government has been run, which is a little bit contradictory given that famous photo of people sitting outside working in the garden where Carrie was there, and I think the line at the time was something like she was giving informal advice. Well, they can't both be true.
Indeed. And we didn't even get on to Rishi Sunak and the falling out between Number 10 and 11.
More to come. I'm sure there'll be a lot more of that this week.
Indeed. Tom, thank you very much as always. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, with what frankly plans to be another fascinating and potentially difficult week for the Prime Minister. We'll bring you that, of course, with full coverage as it happens. We're going to take a break, though, on the briefing this afternoon. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about cuts to disability benefit and leasehold reform when it comes to buying homes. That and a hell of a lot more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for...
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. 25 minutes past 12 o'clock. Now, 1 in 5 disabled people on benefits have had their benefits cut in the last 2 years. That's according to Marsha de Cordova, who's a Labour MP for Battersea. She believes that the government's Green Paper is a grave missed opportunity to transform social security and support for disabled people. She led a debate in Parliament on this last week, and delighted to say that Marsha joins me now in the studio. Very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Just talk us through what this debate was about. I mean, we know there have been, of course, cuts to benefits, haven't there? I mean, frankly, over the last 10 years.
Absolutely, more than a decade of cuts.
So. Just talk us through what you're hoping to raise, though, around this Green Paper.
So the issues really that disabled people have been facing have been going on for a long period of time. And I called for the debate because I wanted to look at the disability assessment. So that's the assessments for social security support from employment and support allowance and PIP, personal independence payment, and also the government's Green Paper, which was published last year. And it was a missed opportunity as the paper didn't really seek to address some of the fundamental flaws within the current social security system, but more importantly, with the assessment frameworks themselves.
And are we seeing, because we always know that actually if you are disabled, a person with disability, you're more likely to be in poverty, frankly. Is that getting worse?
Well, absolutely. The link between disability and poverty is continuing to grow. And obviously, we're now facing a cost of living crisis, which will mean, disabled people, again, will be one of the groups that are so much more hardest hit by this. And that's why, again, I go back to the Green Paper in the sense that the government didn't even address the levels of social security that is paid to disabled people. As you've already explained, over the past decade, we've seen cuts to their support. Universal credit for disabled people, there have been many cuts within that. And also, other elements have also been taken away from disabled people. And just last month, there was another legal ruling that ruled in favour of 2 severely disabled people who challenged the Department for Work and Pensions that they weren't protected when they were moved on to universal credit. So they faced a bit of a cliff edge situation where they lost £60 per month of their income by moving on to universal credit. And these are just some of the flaws within the social security system that the government really have missed their opportunity. It can be drawn back, by the way, but have really chosen not to address some of the deep-rooted structural problems within the system that will impact on disabled people more.
But is the solution to this just simply more money? Is that what you're saying? That with these benefits, or is there more that the government can do that actually doesn't involve money?
Yeah, I think it's
because
absolutely...
what I'm trying to say is that public finances are clearly under an awful lot of pressure.
Absolutely, and as the social security, social security system should be there for each and every citizen when they're in need, whether that's you or myself. The system needs to be there to support us. But essentially, my debate really focused again around the assessment frameworks themselves. Now, with the assessments as it stands at the moment, many disabled people going through these assessments are being turned down in the first instance. They're then having to go to an appeal tribunal to actually get the support they need. Now, the evidence is stark. Over 70% of all those appeals are overturned in favour of the individual. That tells you there's something wrong with the system and the assessment framework within itself. Disabled people feel as though their voices are not being heard when they go for these assessments, and the evidence is clear, they have to challenge the department to get the support that they're entitled to. So, it's not just about me saying they need more money, because that's essentially not what I've said, but it's about them getting the decision right in the first instance. I also believe, and so does, many organisations and others believe that the current assessments are not fit for purpose. They really aren't. They're based on, it's a tick-boxing exercise, it's point-based, and, it assesses you for things that aren't relevant, for example, to you in the workplace or aren't relevant to how you live with your disability. And those are the things we need to get right. And that's why I've been calling for the government to overhaul the system and actually come up with a system that is actually co-produced with disabled people to get it right, so that we don't have the situation where these disabled people aren't getting the support that they need.
This should be in some ways a cross-party issue. And we know, for example, people with disabilities, again, are far more likely to die, for example, during the pandemic. This is a major issue. I mean, what is the cross-party aspect like? How is Therese Coffey's department? I mean, is your campaign, is it possible to work on a cross-party basis?
I think what the government need to really do, and I think the Department for Work and Pensions and the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, I think they need to actually take a long, hard look and listen to the voices of disabled people. Yet again, unfortunately, they published their National Disability Strategy last year. And last month, unfortunately, it was ruled unlawful as they failed to engage with disabled people properly. So there again, they've made that mistake of not engaging disabled people, and they wanted to challenge that legal ruling. And last week, the courts denied them the right to actually appeal the decision, because essentially what they need to do is go back to basics. Let's actually try and work with disabled people and work on a cross-party basis as well, so that they can create a social security system, but also go beyond that, looking at employment, looking at our environment, etc., to ensure that disabled people can live independent lives. A system shouldn't be there to demonise or, sanction people. It really should be there to enable them to live an independent and fruitful life.
OK, Marcia, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
Marcia Takova, who is the Labour MP for Battersea, talking about her campaign to change the government's mind when it comes to the rights for disabled people. OK, we're going to pause there on the briefing. Do get in touch with any of today's stories, though. GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet us. But at just after 12:30, let's bring you up to date with all the latest headlines. Enjoy your D-Rights.
Good afternoon, it's 12:32. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Health Secretary says a plan to deal with the NHS backlog of hospital patient waiting lists in England will be published shortly. He rejected reports it had been put on hold because the Treasury refused to sign it off. Almost 300,000 people have been unable to see a cancer specialist within 2 weeks of an urgent referral between April and November of last year. The analysis commissioned by the Labour Party shows that it's the highest number of breaches in the 11 years since the introduction of the 2-week target. The Department of Health and Social Care said the pandemic had caused NHS waiting lists to grow, but that now most cancer services are back to or above pre-pandemic levels. The Health Secretary also says some recent criticism of the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, was sexist, undignified and unfair. His statement follows publication of extracts from Lord Ashcroft's new book, which accuses Mrs Johnson of influencing her husband's decision-making. Carrie Johnson has insisted she plays no role in government and has been targeted by enemies of the Prime Minister in a brutal briefing campaign. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has been cleared of an allegation that he broke lockdown rules after he was filmed drinking a beer in an office. Durham police have confirmed they don't believe any offence was committed. The capital of Canada has declared a state of emergency due to an ongoing demonstration against vaccine mandates that's been led by a group of truckers. They call themselves the Freedom Convoy. They've paralysed parts of the city for several days, with some saying they want to dissolve Canada's government. Educators here in the UK are looking at lowering the threshold to receive top GCSE and A-level grades this year. The exam regulator has asked examiners to be generous. Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi says it will give students a fair chance following disruption caused by the pandemic. You're now up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Shortly, we'll be back to The Briefing with Darren.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. It is just after 25 minutes to 1 o'clock. Thank you for your company on this Monday afternoon. The last couple of minutes, the Speaker's granted 2 urgent questions today, one to Labour's Wes Streeting on essentially NHS care in England and the backlog, and one to Angela Rayner, Labour's Deputy Leader, on the Prime Minister's changes at the heart of government. We'll bring you more on that throughout the afternoon. But first, our energy bills are soaring, food is getting dearer, and inflation is rocketing, just as taxes are set to rise in April. And according to the TUC, it shows that millions of low-paid workers are now facing what they brand the perfect storm of higher energy bills and tax rises at a time when universal credit is falling as well. Well, our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, joined us now live. Paul, very good afternoon to you. Pretty stark warning from the TUC today.
Yeah, afternoon, Darren. Yeah, very stark warning from the TUC. Workers, full-time workers on universal credit, the number of those up now to 1.3 million in the last 2 years, since just before the pandemic. So they're warning that they've surveyed 2,200 workers, 1 in 8 struggling to afford the basics, and they're saying that the government package, the measures that we heard last week, is woefully inadequate. When you add to that what the chairman of Tesco, John Allen, said yesterday, that the worst is yet to come, and he was talking about the choices that many people are having to face when it comes to heating or eating, and it matters when the chairman of Tesco talks, because Tesco, the country's biggest private sector employer, 300,000 employees, and also the country's biggest supermarket chain, when he says that the worst is yet to come, you've got to sit up and take listen. So look, you're going to hear more warnings like this from to the government, I should say, not from the government, but to the government over the next few months, and as campaigners, as the opposition as well in Parliament try to force the government to do a U-turn when it comes to that national insurance rise. But so far, as we've seen from Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson last week, they're not going to budge on that.
Yeah, indeed. You're entirely right in saying that the government seem to be determined to go ahead with this. There is political pressure, not just from the TUC and others, but clearly within the Conservative Party to change on all of that. And also questions about, the measures the government have taken so far, how much they can mitigate this cost of living crisis. I mean, it really is going to be quite a difficult year, isn't it, for lots of people?
It's been a really tough year. I mean, inflation now currently running at 5.4%, expected to get to 7% by the spring. Food inflation, by the way, and this is from the British Retail Consortium, food inflation currently 2.7%. It's up 2.4% from December. So, supermarkets are saying that they can absorb some of the costs, but not all of the costs when it comes to rising energy bills, when it comes to labour shortages, which feed into the supply chain and then get absorbed by the supermarkets. Places like Tesco, their profit margins run at about 3%. The German supermarkets, Aldi and Lidl, at around about 2%. But there is only so much that they can absorb, and eventually they have to pass on those wholesale price rises, those energy price rises to us, and that pushes up the price of everything in the supermarket. So add that to those tax rises, a really difficult time. Many people in the country, about half the country now, have never seen price rises like this in their time. We've had 10 years of price wars in the supermarkets, of great choice at low value. That has now come to an end with this inflation battle that the country is currently under.
Paul, appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. Paul Hawkins, our national reporter, joining us outside Tesco, where, as Paul was suggesting, the boss of Tesco yesterday saying that there is no end in sight to rising food prices. They may well hit 5% this year. Just to bring you up to date with a little bit of breaking news coming from Westminster. It's been reported over the weekend, but now confirmed by Downing Street, that another advisor to Boris Johnson is to leave as part of the shake-up within the Downing Street operation. Henry Newman, again, probably a name that very few people are familiar with, but he was a top advisor to Michael Gove, then went on to work inside Number 10, was viewed as a very close ally of Carrie Johnson, the Prime Minister's wife. Well, Downing Street confirming he is now going to return to work with Michael Gove at the Department for Levelling Up. The Prime Minister's spokesperson in the last couple of minutes saying it was a mutually agreed decision with the Prime Minister for him to go to that department. It is vitally important where he's able to provide good advice to Michael Gove. So Henry Newman, another advisor to the Prime Minister, has left Number 10. Now, let's move on to housing, because it is wonderful, of course, to be able to buy your own home, but these days, with new builds, they're often sold actually as leaseholds, which can lead to many, many problems down the line. So let's get more on this. Let's talk to Katie Kenrick. She's the founder of the National Leasehold Campaign, and MP Just Matters, who represents Ellesmere Port and Neaston, who is in the studio. First of all, Katie, let's start with you. Just explain to us what the complications, what the problems are potentially when you go to buy a house and it turns out actually it's a leasehold.
Hi, Darren. Yeah, so I bought a leasehold property in Ellesmere Port in 2014. Didn't think there was any problems with it. Got told I could buy the freehold after 2 years, which I fully intended to do. Unknown to me, the freehold was sold from beneath me to a third-party investor, and then everything changed.
And when you say everything changed, in what way?
The process to buy my freehold back was not as simple as what the developer told me. It was no longer £2,000 to £4,000. It was now £13,000. My next door neighbours, theirs had gone from £4,000 to £30,000. You know, the price for permissions. So I wanted to put an extension on my property. The permission fee had gone from £300 to £2,600 to put a small extension on my property because I didn't own it.
And in saying that, though, many people will say, well, you knew it was a leasehold, didn't you? And you know, these things maybe ought to be expected. As in, would you like to see, I don't know, the changes in terms of kind of things being more obvious to people who are buying homes about those potential changes further down the line? Or that actually whoever takes over the leaseholds, whoever buys it up, cannot do things like this in terms of increasing fees by extortionate rates?
Right, let's look. There's categorically no reason why a standalone house should ever have been sold leasehold in the first place. It never used to be. All they've done is seen an opportunity to make an endless income stream from people's properties. They should never have been leasehold in the first place. So this situation should never have arisen for houses. Why did it? Because developers got greedy. They simply got greedy and they wanted to create a second asset on somebody's home. And that is fundamentally wrong.
OK, Katie, stay there for us, because let's bring in your local MP, Just Matters. Now, you've called this the PPI, I think, of the house building industry, haven't you? Justin, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think, as with PPI, what we saw is that thousands of people across the country were basically missold their properties. Now, Katie knew that she was buying leasehold, but there are plenty of people who didn't even know that was what was happening. They didn't know that ground rents were going to double every 10 years, so that within a couple of decades they became thousands and thousands of pounds, which made the properties unsellable. So the Competition and Markets Authority have been investigating a number of the developers and have found that these companies have been guilty of mis-selling. So it was absolutely the right thing to call it. And as Katie says, there is absolutely no reason why any house should be sold on a leasehold basis.
So you're looking for it to be banned outright?
Yes, and we're making some slow progress there. The government have committed to looking into this. The Law Commission have done a report as well. It's slow progress, but actually it's a system that's been around for centuries, which has no place in the modern world, and nowhere else in the world actually has these kind of things on a property which people should own outright when they buy it, because there's no difference in the purchase price when they buy them in the first place. They're actually buying a house, but then all these other charges are hidden away. And as Katie says, it's used as an income stream for developers, when really actually they should be upfront and say, actually, you're going to buy the house and that's the end of our relationship.
Katie, back to you. How is the campaign going?
It's going really, really well. When we opened up the Pandora's box to do with leasehold houses, it's then stemmed over into leasehold flats. You know, we shouldn't have leasehold in this system. It's an abusive and it's a feudal system that needs to be abolished for houses and flats. Increase in service charge, cladding, unsafe buildings, you know, all of it comes down to everything stacked against leaseholders. They are the ones that ultimately pay the price, and it's those that have the least control. And this whole system is rotten to the core, and it really does need to go.
Justin, are the government listening to any of this?
Well, I think they're listening because people like Katie and the National Leasehold Campaign have forced them to sit up and take notice. They've been absolutely superb at bringing this to MPs' attention, and we've got support across the House, MPs and peers are all very interested in the leasehold reform. And as I say, there's been a Law Commission report on what to do to actually reform and abolish leasehold. It's just getting the government to actually introduce those measures now, which is what we all want to see.
And Katie, I suppose back to you just briefly on this. Just how big a problem is this? I know you've had your own personal experience. Do you have any idea in terms of numbers or percentages, you know, how many people across the country are in a similar position?
Well, to do with leasehold houses, there's well over 1 million leasehold houses, which people still haven't had their penny drop moment as this actually impacts on them until they actually try to sell their properties, and they can't get more. Buyers cannot get mortgages on a lot of these leasehold houses because they have onerous ground rents. If your ground rent is more than £250 a year outside of London, then it's really, really difficult to get a mortgage. But as I say, people don't realise this until they come to sell. Leasehold flats, we are going to be moving away to a much fairer system, which is called common hold. And I'm fortunate enough to sit on the government's common hold council, and we are making slow but steady progress into moving towards a much fairer system that needs to happen.
Just explain to us, sorry, Kate, because, you know, so what is a ground rent? So you've bought your house essentially with a leasehold, and then you have to pay. What is a ground rent?
Ground rent is money for nothing. It doesn't provide a service. It literally is a money just to be able to sit on somebody else's land. It's an income that they get, and they increase it year on year on. And we go back to your previous guess about RPI. This is a massive issue for ground rents because a lot of ground rents don't double every 10 years. A lot of them are linked to RPI. If we see our RPI at 7%, that is going to cause huge problems for all of the leaseholders in this country, which is close to 5 million people.
OK, and just very finally on that, I mean, as Katie was talking about, the inflation is a big part in all of this. You know, this will be, and we were just talking about the cost of living crisis, weren't we? This will be an added problem, given the fact also interest rates are going up.
Yeah, well, obviously people who bought these houses will have mortgages as well. But the point Katie is making is that although the ground rent goes up, the freeholder, the person who gets the money, does absolutely nothing in return for it. It's a payment that they just get in perpetuity until the lease runs out for nothing in return. And that's why it's such a scandal, because it really is money for nothing.
OK, Justin, thank you very much indeed. And Katie as well. That's Justin Madders, the MP for Asmere and Easton, and our constituency, Katie Kendrick, who is the founder of the National Leasehold Campaign. Thank you so much both for joining us this afternoon. Just to bring you, as I say, up to date with that latest breaking story about another advisor, Henry Newman, leaving Downing Street today, or it's been confirmed, it's been speculated the weekend, being confirmed that he is now leaving Number 10. In saying that, Labour have been doing the morning rounds this morning, warning that pensioners could face a tough, bleak year, as analysis suggests they could see a cut of around 355 quid this year. That's despite a 3.1% basic state pension increase in April. Labour say that when that's set against the rising costs of living, it falls inadequately short. Well, speaking to Eamon and Isabel on breakfast this morning, the Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Jonathan Ashworth, said that pensioners must brace themselves for a tsunami of price increases under the government. Let's have a watch.
We're really worried about what's happening with the cost of living. You've got energy bills rocketing, you've got prices going up in the shops, you've got the Bank of England saying this is going to be the biggest squeeze on incomes for 30 years, a 2% fall in real incomes, and actually pensioners are going to be worse off as well, because what's happening today in the House of Commons, Boris Johnson is asking MPs to endorse a plan to give pensioners a real terms cut in the value of their pension, because the pension isn't going up in line with these high inflation rates. It means a pensioner is going to lose around £222 in real terms, or a couple is going to lose £355. So any help that they may have been getting on energy bills completely wiped out by these real terms cuts in the pension for pensioners.
But you can vote against this in the House today, yeah?
Well, the problem is, if you voted it down, pensioners wouldn't get anything. At the moment, they're getting what Boris Johnson is proposing is 3%, but 3% is a cut when inflation is running over 6% across the year. So if you voted it down, pensioners wouldn't get anything, which would be really, really unfair. But the reason this is happening is because government incompetence, really. They've pegged the rise to what inflation was back in September. But actually now, inflation is at, heading to 6%, could be at 7%. And that overall means not just pensioners are going to be really hard hit, it means everyone's going to be hard hit. So, for example, a working person on average earnings of around £30,000, because of the big tax rises that are coming, the 10% increase in national insurance and inflation, so wages will stagnate, they're going to be worse off to the tune of £400. This is a real crisis, and I'm afraid the government don't have a plan because they're just mired in all these scandals about parties and all the rest of it, rather than focusing on working people, families and pensioners.
It's interesting, though, that you will then have to vote for it today. I just want to give you a chance to respond to the government, who say they do have a plan for all of this. They say we're providing support worth £12 billion this financial year, which will help the cost of living. An extra £9 billion has been announced to protect against the impact of rising global energy prices. Combined with last year's 2.5% increase to pensions, we have ensured pensioners' incomes have been protected.
Look, you've got stories of pensioners faced with impossible choices between heating and eating. You've got stories of pensioners not going for showers, not using the oven and eating a sandwich instead because they're trying to save on their heating bills. And I'm afraid what was announced last week by the Chancellor just doesn't go far enough. For a start, there's 1 million or so pensioners who might not get any help because they'd have to apply for it themselves. And given that only around 65% of pensioners apply for the pension credit, that leaves around £1.8 billion worth going unclaimed. I'm not convinced the government's got a plan to get the extra £150 to every single pensioner. Secondly,
Jonathan, what can you do about this? You can't vote it down, you say. You can come on shows like ours and you can object to this and you can point out by how much worse off pensioners will be this year. But really, like everything else, this tsunami of price increases is coming our way, their way, everybody's way, and there doesn't seem to be a lot we can do about it.
Well, we've put forward a plan. We'd take VAT off the fuel bills for a start, and then we would extend something called the Warm Homes discount, and by doing that, would give everybody, or the poorest and those in middle incomes, millions of people would get £600 off their energy bills. So we've got an alternative plan to the one in which the government have got. So, and the government can still take up our plan. So we're putting it forward. We're asking them to consider this. Look, pensioners have given so much to our country. I don't think it's fair that pensioners are impoverished. And that's basically what Boris Johnson is going to do today.
There you go. That was Jonathan Ashworth from the Labour Party speaking a little bit earlier on GB News. Lots of you getting in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Johnny says that thank you for giving a voice to disabled people. He says that a disabled person like himself at the Job Centre didn't really get the help that was needed. And he said that he wanted just to get up and move his body. And said, but he couldn't because of the pain. Linda says, when I worked at DWP for 7 years ago, the percentage of people who won their appeals against a wrongful assessment was 70%, so nothing has changed. Thank you very much indeed for watching this afternoon. I'm back, of course, at 3. Liam Halligan is up with On the Money next. But first, on Monday, is the weather from the Met Office. See you later.
Hello again. Following a bright start to the day, it is now turning cloudier from the west, and that cloud will bring rain in some western and northwestern parts during the rest of the day. It will also turn increasingly windy in the far north and northwest, where persistent and at times heavy rain will affect the far north. Now, for much of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Western England and Wales, it's a cloudy afternoon with the cloud covering the hills, and it's going to be damp, especially over hills and coasts, with mostly light rain and drizzle. But further east, well, it stays bright, albeit increasingly cloudy. 8 Celsius in the east of England, I think 12 or 13 across western parts of the UK. And overnight, the rain turns heavy as it sinks south across Scotland, pushing into the central belt and southern Scotland by midnight, as well as Northern Ireland and then eventually northern England. It clears from the north of Scotland as the night goes on, with blustery showers turning up here and that strong wind continuing. And a breezy night for all, staying dry with clear spells in the south, but with the breeze. Temperatures holding up here at 8 Celsius. The front then stalls across central parts of the UK for Tuesday. Cold air to the north of it, milder